Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
This will sound a little odd, I suspect, but it is as I contemplate the scenario regarding Syria that some sense breaks for me with regard to Brexit. I know that'll sound odd, but I look at the Syria story and I think we don't really matter, you and me. And I think that feeling propelled a lot of people to vote for Brexit, the sense that we were being ignored, we were out of the loop. Obviously, I think that was the wrong interpretation and the wrong reaction, but empathy is pointless unless you seek to extend it to people that you don't understand. So I look at the Syria scenario and I sit here this morning preparing the questions that I will invite you in a moment to answer. But I also find myself wondering whether we are almost irrelevant to major political process. We sit here thinking about issues like democracy and sovereignty. But she can do whatever she wants, I think. She can do whatever she wants. And also, even if she went to Parliament and got a vote, I'm just going to burble for a bit, all right? And then you can call me up and burble back. Is that all right? Is that a deal? Good. Tony Blair went into Iraq with a massive parliamentary mandate. Jeremy Corbyn, incidentally, of course, was one of the MPs who voted against that action. And yet, it's very much seen as Tony Blair's war, isn't it? We conveniently overlook the fact that the massive majority, in fact, without double-checking, I would confidently suggest that there were probably more rebels on the Labour benches than there were on the Conservative benches. I'll correct that observation imminently if it turns out to be incorrect. But we never think of that when we're castigating Blair for the perceived error of that engagement. It's his war, Tony Blair and Iraq. They're almost shackled together, aren't they, for time immemorial. And yet it was a parliamentary vote. It was a democratic act. You can, of course, argue that there was manipulation involved in the so-called dodgy dossier and sundry other considerations. But at the end of the day, Parliament was presented with a choice. Do you want to vote for this or not? And they elected to vote for it. So even if Theresa May does it without a parliamentary vote, in many ways, it would feel similar, wouldn't it? This would be her decision. But the idea of her doing it without a parliamentary vote, I have to tell you, even after 2 years of almost uninterrupted absurdity and surprise, I think it would actually be shocking. What I meant at the top when I said that there was no... You occasionally have feelings that none of us actually matter, though. I'm not sort of signing up to the belief that the Queen's actually a lizard, although I will share with you later in the programme some fairly compelling evidence from Morocco that she's descended from the Prophet Muhammad. That's certainly going to put a cat among the pigeons of people who like to use the word patriot as a euphemism for racist, isn't it? Yes, the Queen is a direct descendant, I kid you not, reportedly, of the Prophet Muhammad. More on that in the programme today. But I'm not buying into the idea that we're secretly run by lizards or anything like that. But I do wonder sometimes, when you do this for a living, whether actually we're part of the problem. You know, offering up this illusion of relevance, this illusion of democratic power. Because Theresa May alone could make a decision to back... I saw him described somewhere as a strategically shaven orangutan. I mean, I'm still probably going to go with man-child. To back a despicable man-child and his ludicrous reasoning, which is mostly shared on Twitter. Theresa May has the power to do that. We spent years now, probably more than at any other point in recent history, talking about democracy and sovereignty. Massive misunderstandings of what they both mean on all sort of in all corners of the conversation, but to have conversations about sovereignty and democracy should theoretically have led us towards not only a better understanding of what they are, but also, of course, to valuing them more highly than we perhaps historically have done. But as ever, I mean, it's going to be 2 generations before British society can shrug off the evil influence of the racist demagogues who've used words like democracy and sovereignty and latterly the will of the people to push through cons and lies on an industrial scale. But the words remain the same. Sovereignty and democracy. So I don't care what party the Prime Minister belongs to. The idea that she could bypass Parliament before dropping more bombs on another Middle Eastern country? Can you... I mean, I don't want to pat myself on the back too early in the programme, but now that you've actually heard those words come out of someone's mouth, do you share my sense of surprise this morning that people don't seem to be taking things more seriously? Theresa May could sanction the dropping of bombs on a country that's already shed, I think, just shy of 3 million refugees fleeing death and destruction. Refugees who have been shamefully and cynically turned into weapons by the racist demagogues that I mentioned moments ago. You remember that poster that came out a few hours before Joe Cox was murdered by a racist terrorist? They were Syrian refugees. So they've already been turned into weapons for racists. And yet the suggestion is that we can go and drop more bombs on that same country because their own leader gassed some civilians. I mean, this is nuts, right? And yet it's only when you take that half a step back from the fray that the true extent of the insanity appears to clarify. Now, yesterday, we read out that tweet almost as soon as it had emerged, the tweet in which Donald Trump, I suppose you could argue, he removed the last shadows of doubt that he is anything other than a blundering man-child, a profoundly, a really pathetic individual. But of course, he spent his entire life surrounded by sycophants, so he's utterly unaware of reality, which is the only explanation anyone can provide for how a president could write about missiles. They will be nice and new and smart! Exclamation mark. And I think because he's so ridiculous, we possibly yesterday didn't quite register the gravity of the situation. It's a bit like having Krusty the Clown in charge of a nuclear power plant. You just can't quite put the two together. Look, this man is, and I know some people still like him. Well, I say people, obviously I mean racists. So I look at Donald Trump and I find a figure so palpably absurd on the one hand and yet so clearly president on the other. The office, if you will, the status, so utterly at odds with the individual that perhaps this squaring up of two nuclear powers that we witnessed. You had an envoy, a Russian diplomat, saying on the record that if they fire missiles, we will shoot them out of the sky, and the platforms from which they were fired as well. That's war. That is war. If one power attacks ships that are that belong to another power, that's a war. Shooting missiles out of the sky, arguably less so. But once you start actually taking each other out, as this Russian diplomat threatened to do, and as Donald Trump seemed on Twitter to invite him to try, you have a war. It's amazing how fast time ticks at times like this, isn't it? Because I think on Monday, when we discussed this, and somebody, I think it was somebody Syrian actually, so I probably should have paid a little bit more attention, spoke of a shift from proxy war to potential war. So at the moment, Russia and America are fighting, but they're fighting through their support for rival factions more than they're actually fighting each other. So we reach this point, and it kind of creeps up on you. I wonder if it was a bit like this in other eras, where you came really close to war. People older than me tell me that the Cuban Missile Crisis was a genuinely chilling moment. Do you remember as kids stuff like When the Wind Blows, the Raymond Briggs book that was quite beautifully filmed, turned into an animated film, and I think David Bowie did the haunting soundtrack. And there was a sense of children were taught where to go in the event of a nuclear war. They were told where to go, and this was because America and Russia were relations were at a historic low. They seemed, I mean, genuinely, they do seem to be a bit like that now. So, it looks likely that Donald Trump will launch missiles on Syria, on positions that could be construed as defended by Russia. Russia will respond accordingly, and all bets are off. It seems I spend every day at the moment sitting here offering up a fairly calm and objective analysis of what I think is unfolding on the political stage and then begging you to ring me and tell me that I'm wrong. But well, it hasn't happened yet, has it? So, what do we talk about together today? I don't think we can have an existential philosophical exchange about the relevance or otherwise of our role in society. We'll save that for when things have calmed down a bit. But I do want you to tell me whether or not it strikes you as quite unbelievable, given recent events and given the prominence recently of issues like democracy and sovereignty, that the Prime Minister could be contemplating military action without Parliament's permission. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. If you're cool, I guess, with the idea, then I would like to hear from you about why you don't think this is as serious as I've perhaps just described and concluded. If it is perhaps a, I don't know, I mean, have you got a historical precedent for this that would suggest we're all getting a bit worked up over nothing? I don't know. So do the big picture stuff if you want, but I like the little picture stuff, the small picture stuff, which is us, these little islands, punching above our weight on the world stage for hundreds of years, but I suspect now poised upon the brink of realising that we're not really at the top table anymore. Theresa May could distract from problems at home. So many Brexit chickens coming home to roost. The story today, almost beggars belief, is that the European Commission believes that its chances of doing a really strong trade deal with India will be enhanced by Britain leaving the European Union, because it turns out last time they tried to do a trade deal with India, it was us that scuppered it because of Scotch whisky and immigration. So get rid of us and they can do the deal with India that Brexiters told us would be doing as a direct consequence of leaving the European Union. But we'll leave that surrealism for the moment. Theresa May's got all sorts of problems brewing at home. History suggests that a little bit of gung-ho military action can provide a short-term plaster over those sort of wounds. At the moment, public support stands at 22%, and perhaps more importantly, the Daily Mail has decided to describe it as a gamble. The Daily Mail, I tell you now and I'll tell you straight, if the Daily Mail told her to do it, she'd do it. That's how pathetic this country has become. The man who wrote the article that appeared beneath the most comical headline of all time, the steel of the new Iron Lady. You remember, back in the days of Strong and Stable? The man that wrote that article now works at 10 Downing Street. That's all you need to know about British democracy at the moment. So if she felt that she was being encouraged or supported in this action by the Daily Mail, she'd do it tomorrow. She'd do it today. She'd do it now. I still think she might. But to do it without Parliament? How does that hit you? And I don't really think it matters today what your political loyalties or histories are, unless you're completely blinkered, in which case, you know, I already know what you think, so there's no need for you to ring me. I just can't quite see how we could, particularly after the last few years of political toing and froing, how we could even be thinking about a Prime Minister sanctioning bombs dropping on a Middle Eastern country which has already spawned the biggest refugee crisis of a generation without the permission of Parliament. I'm doing it again, aren't I? I'm throwing open the phone lines and inviting you to tell me what on earth is going on. I haven't really got a question, I do apologise, but we seem to be on the brink of dropping bombs in the Middle East upon the whim of a Prime Minister in bed with the most ridiculous leader the world has ever seen, without a parliamentary mandate. And I'm hoping that you've got an analysis that's a little more upbeat than mine. Let's start in Thirsk. Peter's there. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Peter.
I think I'm going to respectfully disagree with you slightly.
Good.
because that is the Prime Minister's job, and unfortunately the chain of events got slightly distorted in the run-up to the Iraq War, and particularly 3 or 4 years ago, where there seems to have become an anticipation that Parliament will be briefed and take a vote on whether or not. But in fact, the job of ministers, and particularly Privy Councillors, is to be as informed as anybody can be, and then to take decisions and be held to account by Parliament for them. The the issue for a parliamentary debate, as a number of MPs have said publicly over the last few hours, is that not all MPs are privy councillors, therefore they cannot see the whole intelligence picture.
Yes.
It follows that that will be a largely or a partially informed debate rather than a fully
I understand exactly what you're saying, and it may oddly, well, for me at least, it's probably better applied to the Skripal case in the context of privy councillors and being privy to information. But if we worked, and perhaps you're going to tell me it would be foolish to do so, but if we work upon the presumption that the attack upon Duma was a gas attack and that the blame for it does lie at Assad's door, and I appreciate there's a little bit of contradiction of that, but the general consensus seems to be that that's what's happened, then this isn't really a decision that's based on having more intelligence than Parliament can access, is it?
I think you'll find that there will be risks to sources and methods.
Yeah, but I don't think that parliamentarians, if they were to vote against this action, I don't think they would be doing so because they felt that Theresa May had misunderstood the intelligence, or that they would be doing so because they didn't think Assad had done this. I mean, the question I'm most interested in, and you might be right that this doesn't fall under the parameters of parliamentary debate, but the question I'm most interested in is actually the if. Okay, so if Assad did it, should we bomb? And
that is absolutely right, because if you read any military leaders' reviews, particularly Colin Powell, the Vietnam War, he said you did not have a political objective to achieve at the end. Goes back all the way to Clausewitz. But the difficulty we face in this particular situation, it appears to me, is that the President of the United States is an outlier in terms of skills and ability.
You, sir, are a diplomat.
The warring factions within Syria include some very unwholesome people that frankly, we could end up at war with later on down the track. And so one's got to say, what are you going to achieve by making those strikes? And I think it is enough to say, if you use chemical weapons, we will attack you with all the rage and might that we can muster on behalf of humanity.
Even if that puts you squarely in the same bed as a strategically shaven orangutan.
I'm afraid he is there.
And it's the third time, so I like your strong words, but if for the third time you employ chemical weapons against your own people, we will come down on you like a ton of bricks.
Well, I think the difficulty is, again, history shows that if you do not stop people who are so dangerous, and in a humanitarian sense, and you don't feel she doesn't need to take it to Parliament, then, in your view, because that seems to be where the political divide is occurring. Corbyn will insist upon it, and Theresa May probably would lose that vote. So if she wants to do it, she's going to have to do it without Parliament. Well, there's two things about can you get them back in time to do anything?
Yeah, of course you can.
The more important thing is the principle, which is, for me, and I know it sounds almost binary thinking to say it, she is held to account by Parliament for her actions. She should be, and this is why when we go into an election, the leadership issue is the biggest issue that informs voters, and so for me, it is a question of, you are a minister, you're a privy councillor, you know all the things, therefore you take the decision and you stand by it and be accountable to Parliament.
And yeah, I mean, it's an interpretation of the parliamentary model, actually, and of course your position is enforced by the fact that she's perfectly within her rights to do what you describe. I don't know, I hope we're not focusing on the feels rather than the facts this morning, but it seems to me that if 22% of the British public are opposed to military action, then it would take a very bold Prime Minister or a very scared Prime Minister to take the opposite course. And the best way that she could perhaps endorse her decision would be with parliamentary support. Thing is, looking at the numbers, especially after that brilliant success in the last general election for Mrs. Strong and Stable, the steal of the new Iron Lady, looking at the numbers, I don't think she'd get a vote in Parliament. I really don't. 10:26 is the time. Peter, characteristically classy stuff at the outset. William is in Fulham. William, what do you think?
Hi, James. How are you?
I'm good, mate. What's on your mind?
I think you mentioned you wanted to look at it from the small angle. I want to look at it more from the big picture, if that's
Of course.
right.
Yes, of course.
Obviously, Trump's rhetoric and I guess our own, from a Western perspective, we're coming at it from a liberal perspective, which is now we go to war for humanitarian reasons. The thought of going to war for sovereignty or territoriality is sort of unthinkable in the day and age where, you go charging across another country's border.
Unless you're Vladimir Putin, of course.
Yeah.
Or Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. But so I think in the moral justification there, they're bang on. People are dying in a horrific manner. It's been going on for a long time. And then just in defence of Trump's policy, not in defence of Trump, but in defence of his policy, he employed the same sort of rhetoric with North Korea. He was, using pretty aggressive language on Twitter. And I believe now we have unprecedented levels of communication between North and South Korea. So well,
that's one interpretation of it. The other is that no previous American president would ever have contemplated being responsible for the deaths of millions of South Koreans. But Kim Jong-un looked at Donald Trump and said, yeah, I think he is actually mad enough. And if Kim Jong-un knows anything, he knows mad when he sees it, because he sees it every morning when he shaves.
Yeah, so he probably saw one madman staring another madman off.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, we better talk this out. So we can't just berate Trump for using quite bombastic rhetoric.
No, we categorically can. We have to. He's denigrating what I would describe as Western values. You cannot go on social media and talk about missiles being smart and new and nice. The man's an absolute nut job. And, I mean, the idea that we would follow him, I wouldn't follow him to the shops, mate, let alone to war.
Right, yeah, I think we should try and stay. The second thing I wanted to mention, the whole anti-Trump picking on Trump with all the just little mean, pathetic words has got to stop. I'm a teacher, right, and I'm on holidays, and we were doing a project on America at school last term. So we do a 3-week project. The kids come in, they get to do everything on America. So we do geography, politics, history, culture, and all that. And when we got onto the politics, I teach 7 to 8-year-olds. We got onto the current president of Trump, and all the kids pretty much espoused immediately for Trump hatred. Just said, oh, we hate him. These are little 7-year-olds. Yeah. And we sort of stopped the class. Said, well, why do you hate Trump? And they don't know. All they know is they've been told to hate that man. And I found that a bit more scary and distasteful than picking on Trump myself. Yeah,
well, I take your point. You're welcome to talk to my 8-year-old, who could give you about 3 hours of uninterrupted analysis of why Donald Trump is a grave danger to the country. So in the classic tradition of radio phone-in hosts, I blame the parents. William, thank you very much indeed. 29 minutes after 10 is the time. The absence of a parliamentary vote is where I would draw your focus next. 0345 6060 973. Given Iraq, given the conversations about democracy and sovereignty, given the context of recent history, are you as... what's the word I want? I'm going to go with discombobulated. Are you as discombobulated as I am by the thought of Theresa May sanctioning the dropping of bombs on a Middle Eastern country when one refugee crisis, the greatest in a generation, has already been spawned without Parliament's permission? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 10:30. Like the man just said, later in the programme, we will turn our attention either to the Labour Party's proposal today to offer free bus travel to everybody in the country under the age of 25 with no means testing, because that would be a bureaucratic nightmare, I suspect. I giggled when I first heard it, but actually, if I said to you the Labour Party is going to help people under 25 who are, economically among the weakest sections of society at the moment, it's going to help them save up to £1,000 a year. Suddenly sounds like a slightly better idea. Also, it will discourage driving and sundry other more environmentally damaging notions. This is why people like him, is it? Because he kind of comes up with stuff that he hadn't really thought of before? I don't know. We may find out. But I probably will opt instead for the... It's a bit London-centric, but I think it applies everywhere else as well. The Mayor of London currently poised to close several police stations, which my knee-jerk reaction to that would be, you stupid man. But when we actually spoke to him about it, and he explained that it's a simple choice. It's an economic choice between bobbies and buildings. And I don't know, when you think of it like that, where wisdom lies. I do know that the man who's bringing legal action against Sadiq Khan believes he wouldn't be alive today if his local police station hadn't been there, because he staggered into it after being attacked. And it's hard to argue with him. But there will be plenty of other cases, of course, where people would not be alive if there hadn't been a policeman or woman nearby or on their way immediate. So it's bodies or bobbies versus buildings, which I think is politically and socially fascinating. Much more interesting than the kind of knee-jerk tribal reaction to the story would allow. Hang on, what party does the person doing this belong to? Labour. Right, it's bad. Sorry, what party does the person doing this belong to? Labour. Oh, it's good. Do you see what I mean? If you think of it as bobbies versus buildings, as a consequence of cuts brought in by central government, then it becomes a rather more nuanced, I think it becomes a rather more nuanced debate. Also in the programme, I'll give you more details on the claim that the Queen of this country is descended from the Prophet Muhammad. And I've got incredibly good news for short men. You're about to start having loads more sex. And if that doesn't keep you listening, frankly, I don't know what will. 10:36 is the time. Stephen is in Barnet. Back to Syria. Stephen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I wanted to say that I think we're seeing the outcome of Barack Obama's foreign policy. He advocated that America should have a lesser role in the world. And the left often thinks that this will lead to, a better outcome. But I think the reality is that when America doesn't act, then other worse actors step into the void.
Yes, I think Obama wanted to act, didn't he? And was prevented from doing so by Congress, and also then, of course, by the fact that Cameron gave the vote to Parliament, and we voted against it, which left him without support or allies.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's the only area where he sort of basically projected weakness. I think in the deal with Iran as well.
What don't you like about that?
Well, basically, it gives the Iranians a pathway to a nuclear weapon.
Well,
only
if you read the sewage sites like Breitbart, it's not actually true. Well, and also, how can doing a deal with Iran be intervening less in the world?
Well, it depends what sort of deal that you do. We're talking here engaging.
You started off by saying Obama's foreign policy was for America to do less in the world, and now you're slagging him off for signing a deal with Iran.
Well, but I don't think signing agreements is a benchmark part of foreign policy to do with.
Say that again out loud. Say that again out loud.
I don't think signing. Well, it's not even a signed agreement. If you look at
treaties. Nothing to do with foreign policy. Anyway, we digress. Should Theresa May be able to go into Syria without permission from Parliament?
I think that, historically, it's a constitutional question. There's the royal prerogative. The question is, that's historically seen as applying to war decisions. But there's now the precedent of Cameron having asked for a vote. So
the precedent goes back to 2003, so not to 2013. It goes back to Tony Blair putting it before Parliament for Iraq. But what do you think is what I'd like to know? Would you be comfortable as a citizen of this country dropping more bombs on Syria without parliamentary mandate?
I think sometimes there's moral questions, and for me...
Oh, mate, sorry, pal. I gave you 3 goes. Rosanna is in Sunningdale. Rosanna, what would you like to say?
Yes, very glad to be on, because I've got a lot to say on this. First, I'd like to say I would absolutely not be comfortable with Theresa May going forward without a parliamentary mandate, which is why the EU withdrawal bill makes me deeply uncomfortable. I feel this is relevant.
Well, I'm all for jumping around a little bit and bringing Brexit into everything, but I do want to focus explicitly upon this at the moment.
This is about ministers and...
accountability, sovereignty, parliamentary democracy. I know.
Okay, so ministers and the Prime Minister, government ministers, not MPs, post-Brexit, if it happened, would be able to create law that's equal to an act of Parliament without going to Parliament. They can even create new crimes.
But no, forgive me. I don't know if I've got a sore head, because I found the last bloke almost unbearably frustrating.
The people are not aware that they will be able to put them in prison for up to 2 years before they have to ask Parliament for a longer sentence. They can do all of that without Parliament being involved if they are a government minister.
I don't know what you're talking about. We want to talk about Syria.
I know, but I'm talking about parliamentary mandates This is a harbinger of there's more to come. That's what I'm saying.
But up until 2003, I don't think votes were ever put to Parliament before military action was taken.
Perhaps not. I'm just desperate to get the message out there because people don't realise they've been lied to.
Okay.
There's nothing about sovereignty. Parliament becomes less sovereign.
As these bills progress. Thank you, Rosanna. Nicholas is in Wymondham in Norfolk. One stop from Attleborough for the uninitiated. Nicholas, what would you like to say?
Yeah, well, I could agree with you on Donald Trump. He clearly needs people around him to say no now and again. That's never happened. So, I don't think there's any argument over that. But what I will take exception to is what I would take exception to is the idea that we need a vote.
Yes.
Because I'm afraid we're in the position we're in today over Brexit and over the dissolution of the West because of that vote back in 2013. David Cameron, who's foolishly had 2 votes he should never had, that led to the refugee crisis and it led to Brexit. And unfortunately, another vote is the last thing we need. Sometimes democracy is not the best course of action, I'm afraid.
Well, I agree with you, actually. I agree with everything you said, I think, because if we'd acted very quickly when Assad first started using chemical weapons, we could have nipped that problem in the bud. The civil war perhaps would have ended. We wouldn't necessarily have brought about regime change, but you wouldn't have had an exodus of refugees that disgusting people then used to persuade decent people to vote to leave the European Union because of some picture of some Syrians on a poster unveiled a couple of hours before Joe Cox was murdered. I agree with all of that, but I don't necessarily think it leads me to the conclusion you've arrived at, because A, it wasn't just Cameron in 2013. The precedent goes back to 2003. We also had votes on airstrikes in Iraq in 2014. We had votes on Syria in 2015, and I think, when did we have a vote on airstrikes in Libya as well, which hasn't exactly turned out well? Mali in 2013.
Slightly different because the Russians
but I think Syria 2018 is slightly different to Syria 2013. That's kind of the point I was trying to make.
Well, it doesn't really matter because we're all getting it wrong anyway. It don't the point. That doesn't. What you have to look back is the precedents, historical precedents, and what we have, I think, here is a 1930 scenario where Russia is the power that's basically smacked on the bottom, like the Germans were in the 1920s, and is now trying to get its place back in the world. Although it's in a position, as Germany was, if it could have seen it, in a position never to be able to win a world war. Sometimes we have to take decisions, and Mrs. Merkel might be the wrong.
Mrs. May, steady on, mate. Seriously, there's already heads exploding in the troll farm.
They're all making crap decisions, whatever way you look at it.
Put that on a T-shirt.
Yeah, just sometimes you're going to have to. And I think at this point, we need some kind of cohesion between the Europeans, the Americans, and the UK.
Yeah, but no. I mean, I'm nodding along, and then I'm suddenly slamming on the anchors because we need some sort of cohesion by bombing Muslims. Look where that's got us.
No. I don't think I think you're right. Well, hang on, we're going to have that horrible phrase, collateral damage here, aren't we?
Oh, yeah.
The problem is, if nothing's done, we're just going to wander into a desert because we're not. If you want to, and I'm pretty sure you do, if you want to roll back, you need Anglo-French cooperation as much as possible. And the more Mr. Macron and more Mr. May speak to each other, the better, regardless of what Donald Trump does.
I can't come with you on the regardless. That's all. I'm going to be honest with you, Nicholas, because you're such an astute and thought-provoking fella. I've got a horrible feeling that my fear isn't quite the right word, but I look at Donald Trump and whatever it is I feel is stronger than any moral compass that I have with regard to whether or not the British government should support military action in Syria. I just find the idea of getting into a car with him so absurd that I don't really care where the car is going.
But the Russians are just going to keep playing this game, and they're going to push the boundaries until there is some military confrontation. That's what
Russia are, but then what happens when there is a confrontation? But what happens if they do seek to take out the platforms from which the missiles are launched? That's aircraft carriers. That's war.
I think that's going to happen. I mean, they are currently invaded in a foreign country in Ukraine. They've annexed territory in Europe. There's no question in my mind the Russians are trying to roll back their frontiers back to where they think they should be. There's no question. And if we continue to wring our hands and cry about anti-democracy, and we shouldn't have a vote, we are just playing straight into their hands. And there will be inevitably what's the phrase about the piece of toast butter side up? Eventually, it's got to hit the carpet.
Yeah, I think.
I'm afraid that's the fact.
I think you've got your toast-based analogies mixed up. It's about knowing what side your bread is.
But it will happen. It will happen.
So your argument is... Hang on, slow down a bit, all right? Your argument is... Actually, let's go back to certainties. You are one stop from Attleborough, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So I'm glad. All right. I just want to get an anchor in the world, a hook. But, you know, in this sea of change and flux, I just want some old certainties to be established. So your argument is we should bomb Syria without parliamentary permission. Yeah?
We should take a decision on taking some military action.
Yeah, well, that's bombs, mate. Call it what you will. We should bomb Syria without parliamentary permission because the sooner we can go to war with Russia, the better.
Well, in a way...
In a way?
Yeah, if we have to confront the Russians, we're going to have to confront the Russians.
Yeah.
Because they aren't going to take no for an answer until they actually have to take no for an answer.
Well, yeah. I mean, what you've highlighted for me is actually that phrase you used. Did we leave that on air when he? Yeah, good, because I apologise for that slightly naughty word that he used, but it seemed to me to fit the context of the conversation quite well. And what he highlights, of course, is that we're looking at Theresa May. This is why that front page was so disgusting. The new Iron Lady, the steel will of the new Iron Lady, written by a Daily Mail political editor who's now has got his feet on the desk in Downing Street. Utterly despicable, because she is a weak and indecisive woman. The Daily Mail liked her because they thought she'd do their bidding, but even they haven't got a view on this because, as Nicholas has just highlighted so perfectly, it's too complicated to have a football crowd-style response. So you reduce British politics to the bovine and the binary. This is what happens. We end up just not knowing which way to turn, and we've got no leadership, which makes me, I think wrongly, but I'm always honest with you, and I'm always privileged to be persuaded by you to change my mind on stuff. I'm going with that analogy of the car. I'm not getting in it if Donald Trump's driving. I'm just not getting in it. I don't care where it's going. I don't care if you're going to Alton Towers. I'm not getting in the car if Donald Trump is driving. That would be my view. But I'm not Prime Minister. Yet. Ian, I think you've fallen foul of autocorrect on this, and I've just worked out why. Do you think that Preston Macron is off his head? Would you get in a car he is driving? Preston was a bloke on Big Brother a few years ago, wasn't he? Yeah, but obviously it was president that you were writing. No, mate, listen, I'm a flawed human being, just like everybody else is. I guess unlike people like Donald Trump, I can admit it. The flaw I have on this occasion is looking at the driver, not the destination. And if the destination is dropping bombs on Syria, I'm pretty persuaded that's not the right thing to do until you say to me, all right then, can he carry on gassing civilians? And can other people start gassing civilians? Because that's the message that the international community sends out. But regardless of what the destination is, I'm not getting in a car that Donald Trump is driving. And military action led by a man who writes, "Get ready, Russia, because they will be coming nice and new and smart." If you were a Hollywood scriptwriter and you sent that in, you'd get it sent straight back again by a producer saying, "Don't be stupid, there's no way anyone like that could ever end up president." Nice and new and smart. Ooby-dooby-doo. President. What are you going to do? I'm just going to go and bomb Syria. Do you want to come with me? No, mate, seriously. No, I don't. And I think there's a danger, and oddly it's a danger that perhaps lent itself to people on the Remain side of the referendum of seeing President Macron as an unalloyed force for good. He's a curious and an interesting politician, but there's no earthly way that he could be yet described as a consistently impressive one. So, yeah, I don't think necessarily that the fact that he's already got Macron on side lends itself to the notion that Theresa May should line up behind them as well. I think in terms of long-term political ramifications, Theresa May's isolation post-Brexit means that keeping America sweet has probably assumed a greater weight than it should have done. But again, this is all 2, 3, 4 years down the line. Marco's in Cambridge. Marco, what would you like to say?
Hey, James.
Hey, Mark.
It's nice to talk again. I wish we were talking about iPhone batteries again.
Yeah, me too. Or potholes. I'm getting quite into potholes at the moment, but we're going to have to wait until World War III's over before we can have a good call-in about potholes.
Yeah. Anyways, I mean, just going back to your last caller, it seemed like he was pretty entrenched in British exceptionalism.
I thought he was brilliant.
Well, no, he had a lot of good points, but his perspective was skewed.
Oh, like we have a role here. We have a special, almost a God-given role to police these matters. Yeah, okay. I take that.
Whenever you start with you're better than them, ergo we can do X, you end up with a pretty tragic situation.
Not always. I mean, international law allows people who don't gas civilians to assume a position of superiority over people who do gas civilians. I appreciate that's a little bit simplistic.
Yeah, but when is that done good? In terms of British intervention, military intervention, when has that actually turned out with a happy ending?
Well, ask me specifically. When has what?
No, I mean, okay, sorry. I didn't mean to get bogged up on that.
No, we can, because, I mean, I can point to Kosovo or Sierra Leone or even the Falkland Islands or the Second World War. I mean, there are lots of examples of British military intervention ending, if you will, happily.
Well, the World War II, there was a lot of complications and some, millions of people ended up dying.
I know, that's why I don't like the word happily, but it's still, I think it was probably a good thing to defeat the Nazis. Most of us, even post-Trump and Brexit, most of us can agree on that, even though,
True. That was a bit closer to home.
Yeah.
We were directly being attacked.
Not when we joined the war. That was after the invasion of Poland.
When we joined.
But I think in the Middle East is probably the stronger point that you're making. When have we intervened in the Middle East and come home thinking, well done? You go right back to Kipling and beyond, the middle of the 19th century. It's been a disaster after disaster after disaster. So that's the point, I think.
Well, so I wanted to make a point also, a statement, because this comes up all the time about a refugee crisis. We've got a refugee crisis in Europe, we've got one in the UK, we've got one in the States somehow. Really what it is a moral crisis.
Yeah, you're telling me.
And, I mean, the people who don't say that, the ones that you would think that are on your side who still call it a refugee crisis, that's what annoys me.
Yeah.
But
so we're going to go with what I think what you're alluding to is the fact we're going to go and help these people by dropping bombs on their country. But
that's exactly it.
If they want to come here, they can sod off.
No, do we actually care about the civilians?
No, we don't. That's proven by the reaction to the refugee crisis.
Well, that's my point exactly.
I know, yeah.
If the excuse to bomb them is because we're trying to help the civilians there, that's totally hypocritical, because look at what we're doing in Yemen.
There you go.
There's no uproar.
We don't need to bring Yemen into it. It's a slightly different issue, but you're right. We are selling arms to Saudi Arabia. America is selling arms to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is using those. No, but there's another side in Yemen, and the Iranian-supported rebels in Yemen are not the good guys. But this is about civilians, and you're right. There are parallels to be drawn. There's civilians dying in Yemen as a result of Western support for Saudi Arabia, and so the idea that we care about these poor innocent people is palpably absurd. Look at what Theresa May's government did to the Lord Dobbs attempts to bring more child refugees here.
If you want, exactly. If you want to actually help the people there, get them out.
Yeah. Well, or bring more stability. I mean, this is where going back to 20. God, David Cameron. Do you think David Cameron's going to go down in history as the worst politician ever, not just the worst British Prime Minister?
It depends how you look at it.
I like you, Marco. You're thoughtful. Next time, back to iPhone batteries.
Take care.
And you. 10:58 is the time. I squeeze in Mo. Mo, I'm squeezing you in Greenford. What would you like to say?
Nice to talk to you, James.
Likewise.
It's just that sorry, James. I don't understand who gives the people of our country here gives the attitude those. To the bigots who say, oh, let's just press the button and everything will solve. I live next to you as a Muslim.
Yes.
And you call me a terrorist. And how do you understand the problem of people who are 6,000 miles? I'm an Afghan. Yes. I lived the life of horrors of war in my country.
Yes.
And you people do the same. You always say, we're going to learn from our mistakes. and you go again and decide on your own and keep a flag of morality and
give ourselves a pat on the back for being the policeman of the world.
And my country, 40 years of civil war because of the intervention of the West. Same. We had the
intervention of the East as well. Russia came over the border and we supported the Mujahideen. And fast forward 20 years, Mujahideen's turned into the Taliban, and we're fighting against the Taliban. Mate, I can't defend that. It's despicable, and it's a very, very helpful observation this morning.
And then there are problems in our country. Then we fled the horrors of war, which you do not know.
Yeah.
Majority of you haven't experienced after the Second World War. So we can talk like that because I've experienced that life, and I can talk to you. We take granted things in this country, and you talk from your cozy homes.
Yeah, now, you've got to stop saying you.
Call me a scumbag.
I'm not calling you a scumbag. No, but that's why I just want you to stop saying you, because some people listening might think that you're attacking me. You're describing people who are anti-refugee. You're describing people who are anti-Muslim. You're describing some people who perhaps work here.
The biggest who think they are better than me because they lived in the West, and I've lived in this country for 21 years. I've worked hard. I've brought up 4 decent kids, and I've been a good citizen and everything. Still,
so
when you look at my beer,
I know, I hear you, but
the people who think they are better than me, they call me terrorist.
But you know that good people don't, mate. You know that.
But
come here, mate. Let's hug it out. I mean this. There are no. This country is not what you see in the pages of the Daily Mail or what you hear come out of the mouths of disgusting men who use refugees to win short-term political gain and a little bit of fame and fortune. This country is about warmth and welcome. This is the country of Alf Dubs. This is the country of the kinder transport.
21 years. Then why after 21 years I don't feel this is my country? But still I get sad when England loses it in football.
I love you, Mo. I've got to go. I just want to go with you feeling a little bit happier than you did when you rang in. So I'm going to put into words what I think you're trying to convey, and that is this. How can we in the West be permitted to turn your territories into war zones, and then when you flee those war zones, we treat you like scum? And for that, my friend, I apologise. And it is still, I suppose, the paper of record, even in times of dwindling readerships and reputations. The front page of the Times today really stopped me in my tracks as I was buying my coffee this morning. Biggest task force since Iraq on course for Syria. And as we discussed yesterday, Iraq, well, until the beginning of this week, I would have said that Iraq had cast a really, really long shadow over foreign relations in this country. It pops up every time we discuss anything from national security to foreign intervention to refugees to immigration. The Iraq war plays a part in everything. It is, as we again mentioned yesterday, shackled to Tony Blair's reputation in a way that, if ever, it would take generations to shrug off. But I look at the coverage today and I speak as someone who got Iraq wrong. I'm wondering what we've learned. Are you? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I thought that we were different. I don't have a more sophisticated analysis than that, sorry. I thought we'd changed. I thought when I saw 22% public support for an intervention in Syria, and given the backdrop that the deployment of chemical weapons was not the red line that Barack Obama wanted it to be. It did not prove to be the red line. Now, I accept that 2 wrongs don't make a right, so you could tell me we were wrong not to go in 2013, and we would be wrong not to go in now. That seems to me to be a valid point, but operationally, intervening in 2013 could have prevented the 5 years of hell, the exodus of refugees, the radicalisation of jihadists that have followed, and indeed the kind of distillation of ISIS, albeit that they are now in abeyance. That's half a decade of battle and war, bloodshed and carnage. So 22% public support, no parliamentary approval last time. I listened to Theo yesterday suggesting that there might be parliamentary approval this time. I'm not so sure, although this cabinet meeting yesterday seems to me to be very interesting. 22% public support, no parliamentary approval, following an American president who, by most measures, is, how can we put this politely, not as reliable mentally as the last one, okay? Following an American president into a Middle Eastern intervention that could easily be used to portray the West once again as dropping bombs on Muslim countries, and you now have, post-Alf Dubs, the extra level of this analysis, which is we have created a country which has said we don't want refugees. Refugees are not welcome here. That is the government line. 289 Conservative MPs voted against Alf Dubs's amendment seeking to bring unaccompanied children here. The Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, voted and spoke against it. The logic behind it, in the interest of fairness, was that all of the children currently unaccompanied trying to make their way here because they've either got family here or connections or hope. All of the children that had got out of the Middle East and were making their way here were already somewhere else, for example, France or on a Greek island or something like that. And therefore, if we gave them sanctuary here, it would encourage more people to flee. Think about that for a minute. What have we become? I mean, this is astonishing. We've said to these people that they can't come here. Even unaccompanied children aren't welcome here. You know, 87% of the child refugees we took in turned out to be children, turned out to be child refugees. Of course, in the hands of a racist demagogue, you'll use that 13%, manipulate the numbers to portray something very, very different. But 87% of them turn out to be children. We've decided we still don't want them. We were supposed to take 3,000. We took about 350. 289 Conservative MPs voted to stop taking refugee children from Europe. And yet, only 30 of them voted against the military action. I mean, one astonishingly cynical analysis, which I do not share. But I tweeted something this morning about those two sets of numbers. I don't see a link between them. I find them fascinating. 30 Conservative MPs voted against it. David Davis is part of the cabinet that yesterday gave Theresa May approval to drop bombs on Syria in 2018. In 2013, he voted against it. If anybody gets close to David Davis in the next 48 hours, could you ask him what he's changed on, why he's changed his mind on this? I'd love to know, because it seemed to me that those 30 MPs back in 2013 were voting according to their conscience. What's he voting according to now? Or what's he supporting the war according to now? So we have created an environment in which refugees are distinctly unwelcome, and yet we appear to be poised to go and drop more bombs on the Middle East, to go and drop more bombs on Syria, which is where the bulk of the refugees used to weaponise the issue in the run-up to the referendum and since come from. I don't get that. I just don't. I actually just don't get it. I know we're living in times of enormous dissonance, but how can we be contemplating as a country joining the biggest task force to head towards the Middle East since Iraq, with no public support for it and no parliamentary support for it? I genuinely don't understand quite what's happening, and that's probably because of my own myopia or my own ignorance of some of the broader issues here. It might not be. I do think increasingly that there are there's mileage in these issues of manufactured consent, so that, yeah, all right, it's 22% public support now, but just wait until the tom-toms really start thumping, wait until the newspapers get behind it. And that for me, I've been thinking a lot about Iraq, and I don't want to do 20/20 hindsight, but I do think once the troops were there, I got very, very, very irritated by people opposing the war. And I don't know that that was intellectually the right response, but it was emotionally the only one I had. Once the troops are on the ground, the idea that back at home we're having heated debates about why they shouldn't be there at all and why they're committing war crimes or why they're murderers, that for me was a real break. Actually, that was a real struggle for me to get past that. So I think, and you'll remind me if you've got a better memory than I have, I think when I was conducting phone-ins about it in the aftermath of that engagement, I had very, very little patience with people saying that the troops shouldn't be there, precisely because they were already there And it seemed to me to be... We've talked about it since as well. We've talked about how troops who were in Iraq have coped with the fact that the received wisdom now is that they shouldn't have been. So not only were they risking their own lives and prepared to take other lives, they were doing so for a cause that many consider now to have been corrupt. That's horrible, but that is why, generally speaking, theirs is not to reason why, theirs is just to do or die, as Tennyson almost put it in The Charge of the Light Brigade. So we are now, and I'm going to say this again and again in the hope that something sort of shakes out of it, something drops out at the bottom that helps me understand it better. We have a Prime Minister who has received cabinet support to join the biggest military task force since Iraq, in response to a breach of international law, as far as I can tell, identical to the one in 2013 that saw David Cameron ask Parliament's permission to join a military intervention, and Parliament declined. 30 Conservative MPs voted with Labour against that bill, against that call. What's changed? How can there be support for this now with a weaker Prime Minister, with a smaller majority, on the same rationale but with a much less reliable ally, to send to Syria when in 2013 we didn't? I'd love to know what you think. What do you think is happening? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. You can email, you can text, you can tweet, you can get in touch in all of the usual ways. But I just genuinely looked at this front page, at the Times in particular, they're really far, head and shoulders above the rest of the media when it comes to foreign reporting. Some brilliant, brilliant journalists. That headline stopped me in my tracks, and it's accompanied by a photograph of the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the USS Harry S. Truman. She set sail from Virginia this week. So you have the man-child in the White House tweeting his gibberish, and you have ordnance not seen since the Second Gulf War heading towards Syria, and you have a Prime Minister with no parliamentary support poised to join them. And I don't quite understand why. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. You don't have to completely understand why. You don't have to have chapter and verse. It's an impossible ask on my part. But if you can just help me come to a slightly better understanding, even if your analysis is cynical, even if your analysis is uncharitable, what do you think has happened? And what do you think Theresa May is up to? The reason for her to do this is the same reason that David Cameron brought to Parliament in 2013. And Parliament said no. And she enjoys less support in Parliament from her own party than David Cameron did. So we're doing it with a much less reliable ally. We're doing it with a much smaller public mandate. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think public support for going into Syria was probably higher than 22% in 2013 because of Barack Obama's rhetoric regarding red lines and because of the grisly scenes of children dying. And then finally, you've got that... here's the first suggestion. When I say I'll take anything you've got, perhaps I should qualify a little bit. Why aren't you telling your listeners that President Putin is in cahoots with Putin? I don't know. Okay, there's a suggestion. This is all some sort of master plan, in which case the question of what Theresa May is playing out becomes even more pertinent. So the Russians will move everything that's strategically valuable. They'll probably get notice of where these strikes are going to be. They will send a message to Assad that he shouldn't gas his own people, but he's free to carry on killing them in more conventional and acceptable ways. We will create potentially more refugees in a country where we have delivered a very definite message from Parliament that we don't want you here, you're not welcome. Yeah, the more I talk about it, the more mad it seems. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 10:15 is the time, and James O'Brien is my name. And that is the question, isn't it? What's changed? Why in 2013 did the British Prime Minister with a bigger majority... Well, of course he didn't, did he, in coalition? But he needed a parliamentary majority. He didn't get it. We didn't go into Syria with Barack Obama. In 2018, Theresa May, supported by a cabinet of which at least one member voted against intervention in 2013, is going to do so without either public or parliamentary support. Could be an enormous act of political courage, I suppose, but you're going to have to get up early to explain that to me. 10:19 is the time. 2 phone lines free if you're quick on this. 0345 606 0973. With the greatest of love and respect, it's not really an invitation to sort of ring in and just offer up a straight response to the question of whether or not you want to go and drop bombs on Syria. I'm looking for a slightly more complicated analysis of why we're doing it in this political climate. Chris is in Ilford. Chris, what do you think?
Hello, mate. Yeah, I'm a great admirer of your show.
You don't have to be, but thank you.
Probably is that Obama wasn't very keen on going in.
But he drew the red lines. He drew the red lines. He did. The red lines were his.
Yeah, but that's easy to say and harder to do, I think.
No, it was Congress that stopped him from doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
And he could have ignored Congress if he had an ally. I think that was the received wisdom at the time. I don't know that he wasn't keen to do it. I think he was less keen than previous administrations generally to intervene in the Middle East. But when he spoke of the red lines, I think if you read his book, actually, he really did want to do it, but felt that he couldn't without the support of Congress or allies. It would have been the most unilateral action in decades.
Well, and I think now we've got someone who's a bit more gung-ho, shall we say. Although, having said that, I think the language seems to have changed in the last day or two, and they're becoming a bit more circumspect.
You know, when we got that mad tweet on, what day is it today, Friday, so the mad tweet was on Wednesday when he was talking about how shiny the missiles were, or I forget the exact words. Do you know what I said? I said the only silver lining here is his unreliability, because he could actually be going off at 180 degrees opposite to this gung-ho, ludicrous language within 10 minutes, and it took 24 hours, but he did end up, you're quite right, he did end up stepping back, because he doesn't stand for or believe in anything, so he says whatever it comes into his head in a 5-minute window.
I mean, that tweet was a sort of Dr. Strangelove moment, wasn't it, really?
Possibly. But do you...
I think also Theresa May, I think there might be a quid pro quo here, because I think relationships with America haven't been great in the last few months, and I think they were talking about sanctions on steel and that sort of thing. There might be a quid pro quo here where they're going to be a lot kinder to us and things like that if we support them in this venture. Because I don't, certainly there's no...
kinder in what sense? Are we talking post-Brexit trade deals?
Well, that sort of thing, yeah.
I'm a little, I mean, you know me, I'm happy to live in a world where all roads lead to Brexit, but I'm a little uncomfortable quite this early in the programme saying that Theresa May is dropping bombs in the Middle East in order to plug some of the gaps that are going to be caused by Brexit. And
well, there's a more immediate thing about steel, isn't there? Because he's talking about imposing tariffs on steel. So that may be a way of getting around those tariffs. And
but even then, the tariffs on steel wouldn't matter much if we weren't leaving the European Union, would they? So,
well, yeah, I agree with you on that one, but we're not talking about...
I'll take that, mate. You're top of the tree at the moment. Why? Why is this happening in circumstances so odd or even contradictory compared to the 2013 scenario? And I guess the best answer will be, and we can put a lot more flesh on the bones of what you've said, Chris, is that the political landscape has changed so much. But that means it was never a matter of principle or honour, doesn't it? Or morality. It was never driven by abstract concepts of fairness, right and wrong. It was always driven by pragmatism and self-interest.
Absolutely. Well, that's always the case with politics. I mean...
you cynical old soldier.
Cynical over many, many years of following these things.
I can feel my own cynicism ossifying with every passing day. But having said that, I think back in 2013 I probably was on the side of David Cameron for the simple reason that I do buy into some of the concepts of the Geneva Convention, wherein you say, I know it's odd philosophically, you can kill that person using a gun, but you can't kill them using chlorine. Maybe that is an outdated view. I don't know. James is... Thank you, Chris. Great stuff. James is in Bromley. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. The thing, what I think is behind this is, flexing our muscles towards Russia, because in 2013, the Russians were sort of sort of involved in Syria, but on a very small, a minor level.
Yes.
And they had advisors there. Now they've got a full-blown army there. They've got all the equipment there.
Because our failure or our reluctance to intervene with America on that occasion, in many ways, created a vacuum into which Vladimir Putin moved very quickly.
100%, exactly right. And now they've moved in, large scale. I mean, if you look at the Rohingyas in Burma, we did nothing about that. What about the DRC? We saw pictures the other day on television where babies are being hacked with machetes and things like that. We're not doing anything about that.
It's a very selective moral compass that we employ when justifying international intervention, isn't it? And again, like Chris, and I wonder if anyone would dispute this, you're suggesting there's never any morality involved in these decisions, and even Barack Obama's red lines probably owed more to pragmatism than genuine principle. And the reason why Theresa May is doing this now with arguably even less support than David Cameron would have had if he'd pressed on is because Russia has become a clear and present danger in the region, and it wasn't in 2013.
Exactly right.
Which also brings Skripal into the mix, doesn't it?
Well, it does. I mean, it's interesting to read in the what's that body that's the international body that's OPCW. That's it. Yeah. I mean, they came out yesterday and said it's definitely that nerve agent that's produced in Russia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and so this is the first opportunity for Theresa May to rattle her sabre at Russia. And if, the strikes are surgical and they are successful and all they do is blow up empty buildings and a couple of chemical plants and stick some craters in a few runways with no casualties, then I don't know. I mean, does that really curtail Vladimir Putin's authoritarian impulses? I remember this is a man who's prepared to sanction shooting passenger planes out of the sky to make political points at home. I don't know that blowing up a couple of Syrian runways is going to necessarily have a profound impact on him, but Theresa May will look like she is doing something. This is quite strong from Keith. He says Cameron, for all his many faults, wasn't scared to argue his case and try to build consensus. May is pathologically frightened of scrutiny and desperate not to look weak, so she has to do everything in camera. That's really interesting. In camera, for the purposes of that tweet, meaning in secret. That's really interesting. I wonder if there's something in that she couldn't make a case to the British public for doing this. She's managed to persuade the Cabinet. What do you think she said to the Cabinet? Probably things similar to what callers have said to me already this morning. We've got to do this. Putin's poisoning people on our own ground. We can't stand idly by while he greenlights gas attacks in Syria, and that is different from 2013. Maybe that's why David Davis has changed his mind. If you get the chance to ask him, let me know the answer. Chris is in Dis. I like that. One day I'm going to do a show where everybody's name rhymes with the town that they're calling from. But for today, Chris in Dis, I think you're on your own. What would you like to say?
Yeah, good morning, James. I think the one thing that's changed is even less people believe this lie. We're relying on one Al-Qaeda-produced video as evidence for this attack. That is the rebels in the area, Al-Qaeda.
Right. You're a bit nuts, Chris, aren't you, mate?
A bit what, sorry?
Nuts.
Why do you think that, James?
Well,
explain to us all.
When President Macron talks about the tests that have been undertaken on the urine and blood samples from the victims of the gas attack that were brought out of Syria by the Red Cross and other humanitarian organisations, you think that's all lies, don't you?
No. I'm not denying for one moment that there's been some sort of attack.
But you think the rebels did it to themselves?
That prove there are UN documents that prove that the other side have used chlorine gas.
Okay, so in answer to the question of why Theresa May is doing it, your answer is because. Go on again.
Well, Theresa May will do anything that's put in front of her.
Right.
Don't you think it's a bit coincidental, James?
No, I don't.
Don't you think it's a bit coincidental?
No, not even a little bit. So she'll do anything that's put in front of her. So if we put in front of her, don't do it, she'd do that as well, would she?
Of course she would.
So who's putting this in front of her then?
And you don't think it's a bit coincidental?
No, not even a tiny bit coincidental. But who's putting this in front of her then, do you think?
Don't you think it's a bit coincidental?
No, not even a tiny bit. So who's putting this in front of her? When you say she'll do whatever's put in front of her, who's putting it in front of her?
Coincidental?
No, I don't. I honestly don't think it's coincidental. But when you say she'll do whatever's put in front of her, who's put this in front of her?
Over me, won't you?
Who's put this in front of her?
Right, I'm going to try again.
OK, well, let me know how you get on. Pauline's in Watford. Pauline, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Pauline.
I think in actual fact you probably put your finger on it as well as the man who was talking about in camera, is that A, she can do it because the Constitution allows her to.
Yes.
B, the fact that Thatcher won a huge vote of support after the Falklands War, and also...
the Falklands War was the defence of British territory from foreign invaders. I don't know that you get quite the same PR boost from this kind of engagement, especially in the shadow of Iraq, that you get from sending a task force to defend British people from foreign soldiers who were invading their land.
Granted, but you said it, that when people are actually on the ground, the disloyalty that people feel when they don't support a war when their troops are actually on the ground are likely to pull people along en masse towards supporting a war that is likely to happen. And sadly, the Tory party has everything to gain, in my opinion, because they are large shareholders in the arms. Well,
but that was true in 2013, and 30 of them voted.
No, they're likely to be capitalists and the shareholding class that might have.
But that was true in 2013, and Parliament rejected it with 30 votes from the Conservative side going against the bombing.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, but my cynical view is that they are no longer caring about the fact that it's ethical or not. Kenneth Clark made a fantastic...
He did, didn't he? He did.
Yeah, it was beautifully done and so logical and so ethical.
As always with Ken Clark on foreign policy issues.
You know, and in my opinion, they stand to gain largely from the point of view that cynically the rest of the public will be pulled along in an after action, and they will they.
So you think this is a precursor to boots on the ground?
Sorry?
You think this is a precursor or a preparation?
But they're refusing to go to Parliament, which in the 21st century they should be going to Parliament on the legality that they can act unilaterally because they are in power at the moment.
Well, I know, and constitutionally they can. The precedent has been in place since about 2003 when Tony Blair sought parliamentary approval for Iraq. So I get the can. It's the could I'm not so sure about, and your analysis seems to suggest that this would just be the beginning of a process. But without public support or a parliamentary mandate, I don't know. Maybe it's all a coincidence. I guess in the absence of a vote, we can't know whether or not she'd get parliamentary support for bombing Syria. And if she was confident she would, she'd put it to the vote, don't you think? Can we agree on that? So she knows she wouldn't would be, I think, a 60-40% conclusion from that. I mean, certainly if she was confident of getting parliamentary support, she'd go for it. When David Cameron did it, was he indulging a weakness, a personal weakness of leadership, or was he indulging a kind of veneration of democracy, in that he wanted to do it, but he wouldn't do it without Parliament because he was weak, or because he was committed to the democratic principle? But the democratic principle has only been in place since 2003. How, in 2018, have we ended up essentially joining the biggest task force to sail towards the Middle East since the Iraq War, since the Second Gulf War, despite the fact that Parliament doesn't approve of it and public support currently stands at 22%? Answer, we have to keep Donald Trump sweet for a whole heap of reasons, and you're more than welcome to list those reasons without mentioning Brexit, but equally other people will be free to point out the future trade relations preying rather heavily upon the Prime Minister. So you've got that. You will, if you were listening to the last section of the programme, you'll appreciate that there are corners of the internet where you are free also to swallow and spout the Russian propaganda that is very prevalent, that generally hinges not only on the rebels gassing themselves but also on the rescue workers being implicit in the conspiracy. That is out there. I choose to dismiss it for two very simple reasons. Number one, journalists like me would not be able to do the work that they do in Russia, so anything masquerading as journalism coming out of that particular corner of the world is almost by definition fraudulent. And number two, rather more importantly, I count among my friends and colleagues people who cover these issues, either journalistically, or I know 3 people who work in the humanitarian field. And if you ring me and tell me that there's some conspiracy here and the white helmets are actually making films, if you spout the Kremlin propaganda, or indeed the nonsense that's printed on sewage sites like InfoWars and Breitbart, you are calling people I know very well, you're calling them not only liars, but conspiracists, conspirators in epic fraud, and I happen to know that they're not. So if anyone is really struggling to understand why we don't allow Kremlin propaganda on this programme, I hope we're clearer now. And why would Kremlin propaganda be so prevalent in this conversation? Answer, well, we've already done it. We've already provided the answer, because Russia now moved into a vacuum after we failed to intervene in 2013 that has much graver implications for the international stage. Assad is propped up by Vladimir Putin and Iran. So when America go to sail against those 3 prongs, perhaps Theresa May's decision to join looks wiser than it does when you look at it solely through the metrics and the arithmetic of the British Parliament. It is 10:39. Alex is in Crouch End. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Nice to speak to you again.
Likewise.
It's sort of my take on this is quite, well, yes, I think you hit the nail on the head there with the sort of keeping Donald Trump sweet.
No, I don't know that that's what other people have said, and I'm just looking to fill gaps at the moment. I don't know that I agree with that necessarily, because I don't think that he's going to do anything that benefits us to his own detriment. There's no favour he's going to do us unless it suits him anyway.
No, I think you're right, but I think there's maybe more than one sort of element to this. Yeah. To this story. I mean, we've got Macron, Trump and Theresa May who aren't doing very well popularity-wise. We've also got the fact that we can kind of symbolically hit back at Russia with this. Yes. You know, I think the idea of helping the Syrian people is just, you know, or trying to teach Assad a lesson because of what he's done to the Syrian people is just a load of rubbish.
Do you?
Clearly the government doesn't care at all,
because he's done exactly the same thing before without sanction. So it's about Vladimir Putin holding his right hand rather than the buttons he's been pressing with his left hand.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, if you just look at what our government, you know, we continue to sell weapons to the Saudis who kill the people in Yemen. We continue to sell weapons to Israel who kill Palestinians. So I really don't think it's about, you know, protecting civilians, because that's just comes across as quite.
Well, I used to. I feel a bit soiled discussing these sort of philosophical niceties in the context of people actually dying. But there is a historical precedent for this slightly odd distinction between acceptable ways to kill civilians and unacceptable ways to kill civilians, isn't there? Or am I sounding silly now?
I think when you get into splitting hairs over how you kill people. You know, I don't think killing someone's killing someone, isn't it?
No, well, I don't think it is, actually. And
it's death by 10 minutes more.
Well, I
don't think it's that much of it.
Well, you bleed to death through your eyeballs, or you don't. You have to be killed with conventional weapons. Maybe you're right. I'm not. It's not a fight that I'm particularly invested in. But yeah. I do see the wisdom in saying certain types of, like torture, for example. Presumably you think torture should be against international law.
Hmm.
So
yeah,
so why? Yeah. So then you're indulging in similar distinctions, aren't you? You're saying you can do what you want to get information out of that person, but you can't do that.
Yeah, but except we played a part in waterboarding for.
No, I know, but I'm talking about the principles now, not the practice.
Oh, right,
So Russia is involved. We need to show Russia that they can't ride roughshod over us. But when they did it, when they did it without so much Russian support, that was fine.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of. I mean, I think certainly, yeah, you have to read between the lines of this, because I just think it's.
It's strange. It's strange. Maybe we won't get an answer. And I mean, there's some question coming in on your original statement about the Macron, Trump and Theresa May relative popularity. Conservatives currently at 42%, and she knocks Jeremy Corbyn comes third in a question of who do you have most faith in as a Prime Minister. He gets edged out by the don't knows in a lot of polling, but polling is as polling does. And historically, a little bit of military intervention does support a leader. When did it turn sour for Blair? When did it? Because we went in 2003, and he won two more elections after one more election after that. Well, I don't know when it all went really, really sour for Blair. 10:43 is the time. Carmen is in Croydon. Carmen, what would you like to say? Carmen?
Yes, hello, yes.
What would you like to say, Carmen?
I would like to say, what I wanted to say I think has already been mentioned in a way, but also there is another element that nobody's talked about, and it's the fact that Putin has recently been re-elected.
Yes.
And so it coincides in time with that re-election that Putin has previously become build up more power. So now he's got another, I don't know how many years he's got, but he's got a longer term. So he's representing an even bigger threat. So I think it's more about the bigger picture than just...
but do we really curtail Vladimir Putin's military ambitions by blowing up a couple of chemical plants and runways in Syria? And what if he responds? Actually, I don't know how we've got to 10:45 without looking at the question of what if he responds? What if it's true? What if he follows through on the threat? If America launches missiles, Russia will shoot them out of the sky and then go after the platforms from which these missiles were launched. That's when it gets scary.
That's getting very scary, yes. Yeah. And that is a possibility that may happen. So I think we, the West, need to be very careful about the next step to be taken.
Well, we're not being very careful. That's kind of my central point this morning. We appear to be considerably less careful than we were in 2013 when the country and the Parliament decided that they wouldn't get stuck in. So I don't want to be ungrateful for the calls that I've taken, but have we got anything better than the necessity of cozying up to Donald Trump? 0345 6060 973. Or, of course, perhaps slightly more pertinently, the role of Russia has changed the nature of the British reaction, which makes a mockery of red lines and any claim of a moral justification for doing it. So, also, if you're an anorak, and because it's back to A-level for me when I talk about things like collective cabinet responsibility, the question of how David Davis could have been opposed in 2013, but part of a cabinet that yesterday approved it in 2018. I appreciate that we're talking about a politician who's undertaken more U-turns than the average... trying to think of something funny that does a lot of U-turns, but I can't. More U-turns than the average lorry. But the question still stands. How could he vote against it in 2013 and be part of a cabinet that supports it in 2018, given that the reason for doing it is ostensibly identical? It's 10:45. I love it when I say something on air and then forget what I've said and look at my Twitter with a kind of sense of, what? Of course, I was desperately searching for a figure of speech to describe someone who does a lot of U-turns. This might be good from Paul. He says, driving instructor. Quite like that. Owen's gone for a boomerang. David Davis's new nickname could be Boomerang. He does more U-turns than a boomerang. This isn't going to work on radio. More U-turns than a sheepdog. It's clever and I like it, but it obviously if U is spelled E-W-E, it's not going to work. In spoken speech, it's going to work only when written down. But goodness me, I sometimes wonder whether I spend my life asking all the wrong questions. This is nice from Tolga. More U-turns than a homing pigeon with a magnet strapped to its back. You're welcome. Why do you think David Davis is part of collective cabinet responsibility on bombing Syria today, when in 2013, when he had the chance to actually vote from the backbenches, I grant you, he was against it? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And given all of those circumstances that I've described, and my apologies, there'll be plenty of opportunities for you to shout at the moon elsewhere in the day, but I don't want any recycled Kremlin propaganda. The simple question here is, why are we doing it now when we didn't do it then? And why is Theresa May so determined to do it? And actually, as the conversation continues, I think this Russian angle becomes clearer. It really does. And I've got to tell you, when Beth, who answers the phones and produces this programme, is reporting to me a significant number of people ringing in saying that they trust Russia more than they trust the British government, you realise the full extent of this disinformation campaign. Regardless of what emerges with Cambridge Analytica, you have a significant number of people, not stupid people, but a significant number of people who have spent the last 3 or 4 years being groomed by disinformation campaigns designed not really to deliver the White House to Donald Trump or Brexit in Britain, but just to render consensus impossible in the West, to a degree where you will now have people consuming British media, diluting it with stuff they don't even realise is propaganda coming out of Russia, and ending up arguing seriously, because I see it, arguing seriously that aid workers somehow staged these gas attacks in order to whip up appetites for war in the West. And that, of course, is propaganda coming from Russia, which doesn't need to whip up any appetite for anything. James is in Barnes. James, what do you think?
Hi, James, I looked at the Times as you this morning, and I thought, I was in shock.
You did a double take, did you?
I did a double take.
Yes.
I can only come to this conclusion, and it may sound outlandish, is that as stupid and imbecilic as Mr. Trump is, I do not believe that they have any intention of firing one missile. I think that this is the biggest bluff of the 21st century. I think that what they intend to do, because even if he is as stupid as we think, he's got an enormous amount of experienced generals. They know that they don't know where the chemical weapons are. The Syrians have moved all their planes under the umbrella of Russian hangars or whatever it is. So unless they're going to have an invasion, I think this is a bluff to frighten Putin and Assad.
But it won't.
Get them around the table. That's what I think.
But it won't frighten them.
Well, I think it actually will.
Do you? Do you think Putin cares about Syrian blood being spilt?
No, I don't think it's about it. I think that if Putin... That's why all of we thought there was going to be similar to last time, a few cruise missiles as a gesture. But the fact that all of a sudden it's the biggest, this armada, and British nuclear submarines. I do not believe that with the British Secret Service, with the French, I don't believe that they would agree to just with no game, with no concept of who are we going to shoot at. I don't believe it's going to happen. I think it's...
Well, I hope you're right.
I think it's a bluff.
No, I hope you're right. I don't think I agree with you, but I mean, we're both theorising, so there's no right and wrong in this, is there? There's just a selection of...
yeah, I mean, it's wishful thinking, but I can't believe it can be anything else but that. As you said, how can we be so stupid with...
But they have to do... Don't they have to do something now that the rhetoric has ramped up on the need to take action to alleviate humanitarian distress and to deter the further use of chemical...
But of course they should take action, but it's a bit difficult when you don't know where the chemical weapons are.
No, but I think that they can. That doesn't really matter, does it? I mean, it's to show that we're doing something to the outside world, to the people at home. I understand that, but I just think that as stupid as Trump is, I actually think that he actually has got no intention of firing one missile. I would be so surprised. It's too dangerous. It's the most... but you're talking about Donald Trump.
No, I know, but he's got Theresa May, he's got President Macron. Now, as much as I don't like Theresa May, she's not stupid, and President Macron is certainly not stupid, and he's got, extremely experienced generals, Mr. Trump, and they will be advising him, listen, we can't... I do not believe it's going to happen. The fact that it's such a big armada, that it has surprised everybody.
So we could end up with some sort of unilateral declaration and evidence quotes.
Yeah, you force them to come to the... You say...
Well, not even coming to the table, but just because there's no real end game here and there's no desire for regime change, but you'd get... that if I understood you correctly, it would end with Assad voluntarily destroying all reserves and inviting in international...
Exactly. You fight... It's not about frightening Putin, but Putin doesn't want... America to start. That's the last thing Putin wants. As belligerent as he comes across, I think that when they suddenly see what is suddenly being sent there, which will have surprised them, you can be sure. And, you know, you've got British nuclear submarines and God knows what, and, you know, 80 aeroplanes on an aircraft. I do not believe that they thought that this is what America would do, and I think that they will say, listen, we're not going to do anything yet, but you guys, you've got to, you know, we want our people to go in. We want to see that these things are destroyed, and we want some sort of, you know, guarantee from the Russians. That's what I think.
I mean, at least it has the benefit of making sense, James. So probably superior to...
That's the only thing I could come to when I saw that. I thought the biggest arm, I thought it was just going to be one ship, you see.
Yes.
And I suddenly thought, no, this is not. This is a bluff. No question about it.
Of course, it hinges upon the notion of Donald Trump both heeding and understanding advice. But yeah, I think in the absence of anything else, that's probably the hook on which I'd like to hang my hat. Although I can't imagine this chapter in world history closing without bombs being dropped. James can, and convincingly explained why. Johnny is in Antibes in the south of France. Johnny, what would you like to say?
Well, he's just kind of stolen my thunder, to be honest.
Only because he was so good. I bet you weren't going to say any of that.
I was going to say, I think Macron, I think he's leading us from Europe, and I think Theresa May wants to be involved from Britain, and I think they want to rein Trump in as best they can.
So they would be, they would be voices of caution on this.
Yeah.
And I guess, as Incorrigible FCA reminds us, the fact that Trump keeps sacking his generals it takes away some of the sheen from James's analysis and the idea that he'd take advice from these people when he fires them if he doesn't like them. But if it's an international ally on the world stage, they could stay his hand. Wasn't that the rationale for Tony Blair and George W. Bush, though, as well, partly?
Maybe, but I genuinely think that's the case.
I mean, that would give Theresa May more credibility as well. If she argued that we're doing... But she can't argue that in public. She can't say in public, look, of course we've got to get involved, because if we let that crazy orange man-child do it all on his own, who knows how it's going to end. But she can't say that in public, because the crazy orange man-child will get really cross. But in private, she can say to Macron, well, look, you take his lighter away, and I'll get the fireworks.
Exactly.
Very strong. What's the feeling in France, Johnny? Not that you're necessarily plugged into the entire country from your Antibes Erie.
No, I read The Guardian and the Times like you do every day.
Yeah, well, they're the two. I also, of course, read the Daily Mail, because you've got to know what the enemy is thinking. Dan's in Leicester. Last word, I think, on you to this, Dan, although I shall consult with my top team during the break on whether or not we'll continue. What would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
Crazy orange man-child aside.
Yes.
I'm not sure that it's terribly in our interests for the Syria thing to calm down and head towards the conclusion that it would head to if we just stayed out of it, which is that Assad would pretty much finish the job and wouldn't need to keep carrying on killing people. But that's not a happy ending for us, because our friends are on the other side.
Well, but there's no talk of regime change. There is only talk of rap knuckles.
I know, but what we want to do is basically just keep Syria in place, so to speak, because the conclusion that it's heading towards is not our favoured conclusion. With that, I don't know if I'm right, by the way. I
mean, I hear you, but I don't think there is any appetite at all in America or Britain for both bringing about, supporting, and then policing regime change in Syria. There might have been in 2013. We'd gone in then, but the problem then immediately became the impossibility of identifying the good guys and the bad guys among the rebels, didn't it? So
I don't think we're trying to do that. I think one cool thing is that one thing we did learn from Iraq is that a protracted ground war in the Middle East is not great for PR. So we're quite happy for Putin to stay there.
Yes, except at this point we're not happy enough to leave them to it. We just want to say, yes, by all means stay there, but you can't do this anymore. And then you realise the relative flimsiness of issues upon which politicians are prepared to sacrifice the lives of, potentially, civilians and soldiers. Oh, boy.